This SD card costed $1,000. Let me tell you why. No, this SD card does not cost $1,000 in the store. In fact, I think I might have paid $60 or $40 for it when I got it initially. But at the end of the day, the problem isn't so much the cost of the SD card, it's what it cost me. Let me explain to you exactly what happened. For as long as I can remember, I always wanted to be a photographer. I'm not sure to what extent. I didn't know if I wanted to be a portrait photographer, a landscape photographer, a wildlife photographer. I just knew that I was fascinated by cameras. I just wanted to take pictures really and tell stories. So let's fast forward maybe a few years. At this point in time, I've spent a lot of time on portrait photography and lifestyle and working with brands, which kind of became my bread and butter at this point. I was beginning to be known for doing this. I didn't really have any event photography experience under my belt. I didn't know how vital it was to possibly have a camera that had 2 SD cards. I just didn't know any of this stuff. I just knew that I liked taking pictures and I liked editing them in Lightroom. With this said, I get a phone call one day from one of my friends asking me to come be his second shooter at a wedding. Obviously, this was beyond my scope. I only had like 1 wedding under my belt at this point. I had made him aware, but nonetheless, he wanted me to do it. So I did what any good friend would do. I told him about my inexperiences and that I had no experience with event photography, apart from like, my family events and, things like that. Nothing too crazy. So the day comes. I load up my A6300 and my A7 II, which was probably the beginning of the end at this point. As you may or may not be aware, those cameras do not have dual SD card slots, meaning that it does not write what's on the SD cards to more than 1 SD card, because it only physically has space for 1 SD card. I loaded up a bag full of SD cards and I make my way over to the venue. I start taking photos and I'm thinking to myself, gosh, I can't wait to post some of this stuff. I can't wait to see the reaction that the bride and groom are going to have to some of these photos that I've taken today. I was so excited. I was taking in this brand new event that I had never been to. I hadn't been to many weddings at this point in time. I hadn't known what it was like to be at a particularly Indian wedding that lasted 3 days. And let me go on to tell you that these were some of the kindest people that I had ever met. And it only made me want to provide them with better photos for this reason, because they were actually really, really cool. Thankfully, I hadn't been hired to be there for the 3 days or even a full day. I was only hired to be there for 4 hours out of the 2nd day. That's all that was needed from me for a very specific part of the ceremony. So finally, my time is up at this wedding. I start heading home. I'm excited to get there and load my SD card up onto the computer and look at these marvelous photos, these one-in-a-lifetime photos that I've taken that I had known were actually on the SD card because I did review them. And to my surprise, the SD cards were empty. I knew this had to be a mistake, so I quickly go into my bag, knowing that I had switched SD cards halfway through the day, and loaded every single SD card into my computer. But yet the photos were just not there. Did I lose the SD card? Did I erase them? Did I format the card by accident? Did the camera format the card when I threw it in my bag? I had really no idea what had happened at this point in time, up until I took the SD card that I knew had the photos and put it back into the camera. And right away, I had gotten an error saying that the SD card was corrupt and that it had to be reformatted. Obviously, I'm not going to reformat the card. That's obviously crazy. There must be something that I can do in order to retrieve the information that's on this card. So right away, I went on the internet, looked for software that I can actually buy in order to retract information from corrupted cards or corrupted hard drives. And sure enough, nothing came up. It's as if the SD cards had been reformatted. It was the strangest thing I had ever seen. But nonetheless, I knew that this was the SD card with the photos on it. Surely it has to be the software that I'm using. Let me try another software. I even went as far as downloading the software from SanDisk directly to retrieve the information. But yet the photos were not there. So I'm thinking at this point that my name is on the line. And I don't know how I'm going to tell this couple that I don't have any of their images in between the hours of 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. So at this point, I go on to do some Google searches, and sure enough, I find a company that can guarantee me they will not charge me unless they can take the photos out of this SD card. So again, I give them a ring, and it seems like they're not open on a Saturday, of course. But it says for emergencies, please call this alternate number across the country in Ontario. I said, of course, this is an emergency. So I called it. I left a voicemail and patiently waited by my phone. 3 hours later, my phone rang. Now, the gentleman that actually called me back was super, super kind and understanding. But he asked me some information. Number one, what kind of camera loaded this SD card? Number two, did it have two SD cards? It doesn't. Number three, what kind of SD card did I have inside the camera? And he told me that even with their services, it would be impossible to retrieve the information on the SD cards. I asked him why. And he went on to tell me for two reasons. Number one, the way that Sony erases information from cards is very, very, very specific. And sometimes, combined with certain SD cards, can provide a certainty that even though the photos physically are in here, he did assure me that they're here, but that there's no technology in current existence that would be able to extract the photos from the SD card. Sure enough, I asked him if I could send the SD card in anyways. He said it would be completely useless. And after spending an hour on the phone talking with him and him assuring me that there was nothing that could be done about getting these photos off this SD card, I felt that it was just time to face the music. I called the main photographer. I will tell you that I've never had to tell somebody something so difficult in my life, in my professional life, when it came to photography. But it was time to just face the music. I told him, look, I used two cameras that day. The A6300, which has okay photos, and I used the A7 II. So I went on to tell him the news. I have photos from the A6300. It's not the best camera, and the photos are okay, maybe even passable. But my best photos were definitely on the A7 II, and the card is corrupted. Now, I offered obviously to edit the photos from the A6300 myself, free of charge. I also submitted the raw files to him in case he wanted to do something else. I did show him my receipts and saying, hey, these are the softwares that I've actually bought and I've done my due diligence in order to try to retrieve this data. I did show him the email from the gentleman that I did get saying that, hey, this SD card is just a no-go. After coming to an understanding with the main photographer saying that I would edit my photos and edit some that weren't mine, some extras, we called it even. Obviously, this guy will not hire me again, but he did. And I think I can tell you why, is that he sat me down and told me, hey, it's very admirable that you came here not just to break bad news, but you broke bad news and at the same time told me everything that you went through in order to try to resolve the problem. And many people, he says, won't do that. So of course, I'm going to hire you again because I know that even if you mess up, I'm going to be able to rely on you. In all, we were able to resolve the problem because of the fact that this is only 4 hours out of 3 days that we were missing. Number two, I did have the backup camera. Even though it wasn't the greatest camera with the best lens on it, we still had photos of the events of those 4 hours taking place. And I did do my best to edit them and make them match with the rest of the day. And number three, I learned my lesson. So not only will I not bring my A6300 to a wedding anymore, but I did go ahead and buy a camera that does have two SD card slots in order to prevent this ever happening again. My A7 II is still with me. It does still go with me to weddings, but it is much more of my backup camera, my secondary camera that I wear on my left side, not on my right side, which is my main camera. And really the reason that I did want to go ahead and tell you guys this story is to, number one, don't be afraid to face the music. At the end of the day, nothing's ever going to go according to plan. And sometimes things are going to completely derail you. And even though that was the first event I did for this photographer, it happened to be the first of many that I went on to do. And again, that is on the back of the fact that I was honest and willing to face the music at the end of the day. And number two, buy the appropriate gear to at least cover your butt. Don't end up in the same situation where you got to go show face to the person that hired you saying that, hey, I don't have any of your photos. Obviously, this is an event that even though my friend assured me that it was okay that I go participate in this event as a photographer, I shouldn't have taken it. I should have been a little bit more prepared. I should have been a follow along. I should have done many other things before I took a primary role. Even if it was only for 4 hours, I should have assured myself that I had that practice, that I had that experience, and that I had the appropriate gear to prevent anything going wrong. And that's really why I wanted to tell you guys about this situation, because this SD card went on to cost me $1,000, both in what I missed in pay, because I surrendered my pay for the event, and number two, in what I paid to pay for software, 2 different softwares, to try to retrieve the data on this. Hopefully my future clients don't see this and try to judge me on this. But again, this is past stuff. It's behind me now. I have the appropriate gear. And please just learn from my mistakes, because one big hiccup could cost you your entire wedding career. Take care, guys.